Continuing chapter 5, Public Affairs during the childhood and youth of Jesus. It was in the procuratorship of Capaneus that Jesus was in the temple about a year after Annas had been made high priest. Under his government, it was that the Samaritans polluted the temple. Was it really even one of them? After the manner adopted by Josiah toward the idolatrous shrines, by secretly bringing dead men's bones and strewing them in the cloisters during the night of the Passover, when the priests had opened the temple gates, as their wont was, immediately after midnight. And, of course, back then they really did mean the middle point between dusk and dawn. Thenceforward, the Samaritans were excluded from the temple. It was another matter of distress and public perplexity and increase of hate between Jews and Samaritans. Now, if they wanted to be to use the temple, you think they wouldn't have done that. So, about 10 of the Common Era, Capaneus was succeeded in the procuratorship by Ambivius, and he was succeeded by Annius Rufus upon the death of Augustus, 14 of the Common Era. His successor, Tiberius, appointed a new procurator, Valerius Gratus, who held office till he was succeeded by Pontius Pilatus. There had been a succession of high priests whose history is not now important. Well, not in this context, perhaps, or maybe more important because of the wider context of Jesus or the individuals that went into the Jesus story. Pilatus, or Pilate as we know him, found Joseph Caiaphas in the high priest's office. The pronomen of Pilate is lost. Of his early history, we have no authentic information. There is a German legend which represents him as the bastard son of Taurus, king of Malanka. The story further goes that having been guilty of a murder in Rome, whither his father had sent him as a hostage, he was sent into Pontus, where having subdued certain barbarous tribes, he rose to honor, received the name of Pontius, and was sent as procurator to Judea. But his name may indicate he was of the gens of the Pontii, whose first distinguished member was the famous Samnite general C. Pontius Telesimus. Pilate was the 6th Roman procurator of Judea. The usual official residence was at Caesarea, but during the festivals, it was the custom of the procurator to be present in Jerusalem for the better oversight of the turbulent population who ordinarily then assembled, and were on such occasions most easily excited to violence. Shortly after his appointment, Pilate removed to Jerusalem for winter quarters, in order, says Josephus, to abolish the Jewish laws. In the nighttime, without the knowledge of the people, the Roman standards were brought in and set up in the city. These standards bore the image of Caesar. And because the religious regulations of the Jews were so stringent against images, the former procurators had respected religious scruples, which Pilate disregarded and defied. The infuriated people rushed to Caesarea in multitudes and interceded with Pilate to remove the offense. This was continued for 5 days with increasing vehemence. Pilate refused on the ground that the removal would be an affront to Caesar. But what violations were being done by the people, right? But yeah, no graven images. You don't. It has nothing to do with whether they're worshipped or not. But well, I guess it sometimes can. But it's supposed to be a commandment unto itself. The people still perceived in their pleadings. They persevered in their pleadings. On the 6th day, they renewed their attestations before Pilate, who was seated on a throne in an open space and had troops so arranged that at a given signal they surrounded the suppliants. Pilate then threatened them with immediate death unless they ceased disturbing him and went to their homes. Upon this they threw themselves upon the ground, made bare their necks, and declared that they would sooner die than see their laws so violated. Don't know how to live in the real world, right? Their numbers and the firmness of the resolution prevailed. Pilate ordered the standards to be brought back from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Not warned by this, Pilate attempted another outrage on the feelings of the Jews. In his place at Jerusalem, he hung up certain gilt shields without images, but bearing the names of other deities. Heathen and pagan and words like that aren't appropriate unless we're really talking about relating to, the material culture thing, but that's not what they mean, right? Philo ad Caium 38 to 589. The people had not forgotten the clandestine introduction of the standards, and this new act greatly inflamed them. They appealed to the emperor Tiberius, who ordered their removal. Well, people should be allowed their freedom of religion to an extent like that. It's not like you're, climbing Temple Mount with but even then, the Temple Mount shouldn't, it may have been a sacred place before, it was a sacred place before any form of Judaism. So they appealed to the Emperor Tiberius, who ordered the removal. This must have weakened Pilate's influence at Rome. The Corbin, John Biblical Archaeology, or some language variation of that, 392 and 394. Among the Jews was any oblation, but especially in the fulfillment of a vow, which was dedicated to the temple. It might be money, cattle, lands, houses, and it became the property of the temple. Only that the land might be redeemed in the year of Jubilee. Leviticus 27, 1 through 24. Sorry, made more mistakes today. It was, of course, held as to be very sacred, but this treasure was diverted by Pilate to the building of an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem. This so incensed the Jews that in the language of Josephus, many 10,000s of the people got together and made a clamor against him. Pilate dressed a number of his soldiers like the Jews, and had daggers concealed on their persons. When the Jews would not forbear, he gave the soldiers the signal agreed on beforehand, and they fell upon the unarmed and surprised populace, striking the innocent as well as the guilty, so that many were slain and others wounded. This was the kind of man under whose procuratorship Jesus spent his whole public life and exercised his public ministry, under whom he suffered and died, as the evangelists and other historians relate. Tacitus says, Christus Tiberio imperate per procuratorum Pontium Pilatum supplicio effectus erat. Antiquities, Antiquities 1544. The following is the only mention of Jesus which occurs in the writings of Josephus. Josephus Antiquities, book 18, chapter 3. And of course, there's question of its authority as being part of that book. But Antiquities, book 18, chapter 3 is previously quoted over here. But now there was, about this time, Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold. These and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, and the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Now, if he was the Christ, he was called Christ. If there's a blank there, he was called Christ, could have made sense. And certainly those things were said about him, but saying that the crucifixion was a historical thing when it doesn't by any stretch exist in anything before what you would call the Pauline writings. But the Pauline writings aren't as early as people think they are. Nothing, not a phrase, exists before the 2nd century, the Common Era, when Apollonius Christ would have been dead. Because Apollonius Christ appears to be partly a historical origin of Paul and partly a historical origin of Jesus. But that's for other programs, right? We turn now from Judea to Galilee. By the first will of Herod, Antipas was to be his successor, but a change of the will gave precedence to Archelaus, and Augustus Caesar confirmed Herod Antipas as Tetrarch of Galilee, according to the altered will of his father, and hence he is mentioned by Matthew and Luke as Herod the Tetrarch. The name of king given him by Mark 6:14 must be regarded as a title of courtesy. His first wife was the daughter of Aretas, king of Arabia Petraea. While living with her, he fell in love with Herodias, the daughter of Aristobulus, who was his own half-brother. She was then the wife of Herod Philip I, another half-brother of Herod Antipas, and by him had one daughter, Salome. He was living in retirement in Rome. Herodias disliked this obscurity and forsook him, and accepted the offer of Herod Antipas to live with him. The outraged Aretas, the father of his first wife, whom he had divorced to please Herodias. Aretas made war upon him and destroyed his army, and was restrained only by a movement of the Emperor Tiberius, who ordered Vitellius to march against Aretas, which command failed of fulfillment because of the death of Tiberius. But the Jews regarded this disaster to Herod Antipas as the vengeance of heaven for the murder of John the Baptist, who had rebuked Herod Antipas and Herodias for the sinful lives they were leading. This Herod had quarreled with Pilate the procurator in Judea. It is supposed because of those Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. Well, figure of speech, not like they gathered it up and mixed the two together or something. A circumstance mentioned in Luke 13:1 and 23:12. There seems to be no mention made elsewhere of this, but the Galileans were foremost in the phrase which occurred at the festivals, and these difficulties were so frequent that it is not to be wondered that one of them escaped the notice of Josephus. Herod would naturally resent Pilate's punishing his subjects, whatever might have been their guilt, not to mention the fact that he assumed the role of the patron of the Jews. The court he paid the Jews is shown by his attendance upon the Passover in Jerusalem. That visit gave Pilate an opportunity to propitiate him by acknowledging his jurisdiction over the Galileans, so that when he had learned that Jesus was a Galilean, he sent him to Herod Antipas. By Herodias, he was instigated to a movement which ended in his ruin. His nephew, Herod Agrippa I, under whom years after came all the territory which had been ruled over by his grandfather Herod the Great, was a favorite with Caligula, having been imprisoned for expressing a wish for Caligula's early succession to the imperial throne. Upon him, Caligula showered favors. What specially moved Herod Antipas and Herodias was that Herod Agrippa had attained to a royal estate, so they determined to go to Rome, ostensibly to petition for the royal title, but really to intrigue against Agrippa, who on his side brought accusation against his uncle Antipas, whom the Emperor Caligula banished to Gaul, where he died. Herodias showed at least this good trait, that she shared his exile. Josephus puts a very pretty speech into her mouth, making her say to Caius, "Thou indeed, O Emperor, actest after a magnificent manner, and as becomes thyself in what thou offerest me, but the kindness which I have for my husband hinders me from partaking of the favor of thy gift, for it is not just that I, who have been made a partner in his prosperity, should forsake him in his misfortune." Josephus' Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 8. The character of this prince can easily be gathered from the record. He was not so great a tyrant as his father Herod, but he was unscrupulous. He shut up John in prison for no crime nor violation of the peace. But because that faithful teacher reproved him for his adultery with Herodias and for his general wickedness of life, he was cunning. Jesus, generally so mild and careful in his speech, calls him a fox. Luke 13:32. He was weak and superstitious. For a time he heard John gladly. Mark 6:20. And wished to see Jesus, that he might witness some miracle. Luke 23:8. Because of a foolish oath uttered in wine, he slew John and was afterward filled with remorse. And although a Sadducee, not believing in spirits and the resurrection, he was frightened when he heard of Jesus, fearing it might be John come back from the dead. Mark 6:14. He is willing to have Jesus destroyed, but contrived to roll the responsibility upon Pilate. He was unscrupulous, capricious, sensual, superstitious, and weak. The church, which is not a correct term for people who don't worship their heroes. You could say that about a lot of the Roman cults, and I guess technically you could say that about some of the Jews, but that wasn't the point. They were supposed to be God worshippers. The office of the high priest had felt the general unsettling effect of these turbulent times, so that there seems to be some confusion at the date of the opening of the public ministry of Jesus. Luke says in 3:2 that Annas and Caiaphas were high priests. An investigation of all available records gives us the following result. The real and acting high priest was Joseph, surnamed Caiaphas, and his vicar, or deputy, was his father-in-law called Annas by Luke. Annas by Josephus, but probably called in his own time and place Hananiah. Caiaphas was appointed to the office by the procurator Valerius Gratus about 25 of the Common Era, and held it through all the procuratorship of Pontius Pilate, and was consequently high priest through the whole public ministry of John and Jesus. He married the daughter of a former high priest, Annas, who still possessed great influence, several of his family having held the highest sacerdotal position. The mention of these two jointly by Luke has made some perplexity, which has given rise to various explanations, of which it is necessary to state only that which seems satisfactory, namely that of Wieseler, who in his chronology, and more recently in an article in Herzog's Real Cyclopédie, maintains that the two, Annas and Caiaphas, were jointly at the head of the Jewish people, the latter being the actual high priest and Annas being president of the Sanhedrim. This latter position he might have acted as vicar to his son-in-law, an office called in Hebrew Sagan. Not seen, but Sagan, and mentioned by the Talmudists. This is the opinion of Quinol. It is suggested that such position would not be unworthy of one who had held the office of high priest, since the dignity of the Sagan was very great. Lightfoot shows, For instance, that he might on urgent occasions enter the holiest of holies, Hor Heb Ru Luck. Yeah, I'm not sure what Hor and Luck stand for. 3:2. It is not strange that having been actually a high priest and being now president of the Sanhedrim, he, a high priest, he should still be called by the name of the lofty office he had filled. We shall meet Caiaphas as the history shall progress. It may be merely mentioned here that he was a Sadducee, and he used his influence oppressively, the Sadducees usually being more intolerant than the Pharisees, and frequently it has been remarked that no people are more illiberal than those who claim, par excellence, the name of liberals. And boy, is that ever true now. Bigger government and all that stuff. And that no sectaries have been more intolerant than those who have no creed. The word Sanhedrim, or more accurately, Sanhedrin, coming from the Greek, Sanhedrion, no Hebrew etymology having been found for it. Well, maybe not on the spot, but give me the spelling. Designates the Supreme Council of the Jewish people as it existed in the times of Jesus and long before. Of course, even in Tanakh itself, there's what you call foreign words. In the Talmud, it is called the Great Sanhedrin. And of course, things that have foreign origin is, in terms of their etymology, is even more common than that. But so in the Mishnah, the house of judgment. So the im plural instead of the in plural, one out. In Aramaic writings, well, I guess it, with some of the words, it would tell you where you're from, right? The Mishnah traces the origin of the assembly to the times of Moses, who was directed, Numbers 11, 16, and 17, to associate with him 70 elders in the government. But Borstius de Sanhedrius 25 to 40 seems to show that the identity of this council of Moses and the Sanhedrim of latter days was a mere conjecture of the rabbins, as we find no trace of the continuance of the council of Moses in Deuteronomy 17, 8, and 10, where it surely would have been mentioned if then existing, well, not necessarily, nor in the age of Joshua and the judges, nor in the times of the kings, so that the council seems to have been temporary. Doesn't mean it had universal authority either, but if it's just something there, it's like, why is it's not out of the ordinary, so why is it part of the story? The Greek etymology of the word points to a time subsequent to Alexander's supremacy in Judea. Now, a lot of stuff has gone that route, right? Is that things that are newer, whether they are representative or just new traditions that people have concluded would be fitting, they're projected as being much older. Like all these groups of the 70s and even in the past decade that have claimed we're the most ancient religion. No one ever heard of us until 2013, but yeah. Livy expressly states, 1432, pronunciatum quod ad statum Macedonia pertenibat senatores quas dros vacant legendas esse quorum concilio res publica administratur. It has been conjectured that Gerusia, Geusia, Tone, Eudeon of Second Maccabees, 2:10, 4:44, 11:22 designates the Sanhedrin. If so, it is the earliest historical trace of the institution. Okay, then the name would have changed, you would say, but many learned men agree in believing that it arose after the return of the Jews from Babylon and in the time of the Seleucidia of the Hasmonean princes. So historical Judaism appears. The fact stated by Josephus that Herod, when procurator of Galilee about 47 BCE, was called before the Sanhedrin on the charge that he had usurped the functions of that body in putting men to death, shows how great its power was at that day, and the probability that it was not then of recent origin. Antiquities, volume 15:9-4. For the constitution of the Sanhedrin, we are compelled to rely upon the incidental notices in the New Testament, namely Matthew 26:57 and 59, Mark 15:1, Luke 22:66. But are we? And wasn't there a reworking? What decade was it? In the Middle Ages, basically. A way to buy power and arrange themselves. But there was a council, and there were families, and the council was picked upon those, from those couple hundred families. But in Acts 5:21, from these it probably appears that the body consisted of the high priests and those who had been high priests, as archiereis, chief priests. Okay, I take back that word was gerusia. That is to say, the heads of the 24 classes into which, the Quran. Okay, yeah, it's the same word. That is to say, the heads of the 24 classes into which the priests were divided. Pres, pateroi, elders, men of age and experience, and grammatais, scribes, men learned in the law. The number was probably 71, and there were nearly perfect unanimity of opinion among the Jews, and that was expressed in the Mishnah, which says, Sanhedrin 161, that there were 71 judges. The reason assigned for this number is not sound, namely that at Numbers 11:6, Moses is required to gather 70 elders, who, with himself, would make 71, as we have chosen. Probable that no connection existed between the council of Moses and the Sanhedrin. And just like of this time, there was certainly a break between the one set up in the Middle Ages. Our reception of this number is to be based upon tradition of the Jews, which has its probability increased by the suggestion that the modern council would, as far as possible, have been formed upon the model of that of Moses. Well, they're representing the same thing, so the president's, the Nazi. We get into talking about the Nazi next, which became a slur before the National Socialist German Workers' Party came into play for all Germans. So, by Slavic people.